and lots of people were brutally murdered. It was a rough time, and
And when
it was difficult. I mean, it shouldn't be sugarcoated. We lived in a little town just outside of Belfast. My parents moved out of Belfast because they wanted, obviously, the best for their children. I have a brother, just the two of us. Had we stayed in Belfast, goodness knows what might have happened. We might have ended up dead, or we might have ended up joining some paramilitary organisation. It was common. It happened. You had to be careful where you went. You didn't. You had a very small circle of friends, because you wouldn't know if the people that you associated with were on the side of remaining part of the United Kingdom, or wanted to become part of Ireland.
All right. Barry, thank you for coming all the way across the pond and doing the Jobbers episode.
My
Really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
Good to be here.
You're here on Veterans Day in the Pearl Harbor War Room with the new roof being constructed over our heads. So if you hear some background noise, don't be afraid.
Okay,
They're just putting a new roof on.
don't duck under the table.
All right. Before we get started and I give an introduction to your long and illustrious career in the oil industry, I do want to take a moment. It's Veterans Day. So I want to read from an American perspective what that's about, and then also from a British perspective. Veterans Day began as Armistice Day in 1919 to commemorate the end of World War I and honor veterans of that war. After World War II, it was expanded to include all American veterans and was officially renamed Veterans Day. That was done by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1954, the same year that our company was founded. And on that date, November 11th, it marked the end of World War I on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. And from a British perspective, since you're wearing the poppy, I really appreciate that. The poppy is the enduring symbol of remembrance of the First World War. It is strongly linked with Armistice Day, 11th of November, but the poppy's origin as a popular symbol of remembrance lies in the landscapes of the First World War. Poppies were a common sight, especially on the Western Front. They flourished in the soil churned up by the fighting and the shelling. The flower provided Canadian Dr. John McCrae with inspiration for his poem In Flanders Fields, which he wrote while serving in Ypres in 1915, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It was first published and punched, having been rejected by The Spectator, and in 1918, in response to McCrae's poem, American humanitarian Moana Michael wrote, "And now the torch and poppy red we wear in honor of our dead." She campaigned to make the poppy a symbol of remembrance for those who had died in the war. Artificial poppies were first soiled in Britain in 1921 to raise money for Earl Hagg Fund in support of the ex-servicemen and the families of those who had died in the conflict. They were supplied by Anne Guerin, who had been manufacturing the flowers in France to raise money for war orphans. Selling poppies proved so popular that in 1922, the British Legion founded a factory staffed by disabled ex-service people to produce its own, and it continues to do so all the way to today. So thank you for wearing your poppy. And to get the brain warmed up, I wanted to ask a few fun questions before I provide your background. We went to a Golden Knights game last night, right here in Las Vegas.
We did.
What'd you think of it?
High energy. It was good fun. I enjoyed it. We have ice hockey, or hockey as you'd like to call it,
We call it hockey.
Yeah.
Why do you call it ice hockey?
because hockey's field hockey. Proper hockey is field hockey.
Fair enough.
So, but it was high energy. I enjoyed it very much. It was good fun.
And us Americans like to mess up the name of sports. Like we call it football, soccer, and we call ice hockey hockey.
Yeah, crazy.
Thanks for putting up with us. All right, another question. Last trip that you made out to Las Vegas, I believe you guys went to the Sphere.
We went to the Sphere, yeah, saw the Eagles.
What'd you think?
Oh, that was amazing.
So I just went to the Eagles on Saturday night. It was my
Yeah, it
wife's.
was a birthday celebration.
It was my father-in-law's. He's about to turn 70.
Wow.
So we went out to a dinner. We did the Eagles concert. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah.
It's a unique venue in the sense that I think the venue makes the artist better.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because you got guys up there that are 78 years old, and not everybody's Mick Jagger. You can't run around at that age and put on a performance.
Yeah.
And the Eagles are not that group. But with the Sphere and 167,000 speakers, I mean, it's probably one of the best acoustic systems you could ever imagine. Plus the visual effects, it was amazing.
I think it's kind of, it spoils you for any performance you're going to see afterwards. I don't know how you see a large auditorium show now. That was because that would just knocked it out of the park.
I was talking about that with my father-in-law because in Colorado you got Red Rocks, beautiful nature setting. California you got Hollywood Bowl. I've been to that; it's amazing. But the Sphere is unique.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a venue that really makes the artist that much better.
Yeah.
So if you're an artist, especially an aging artist, I think you can put on a great production at the Sphere.
Mind you, I did go to see Paul McCartney on this trip, talking of aging artists.
Well, that's my next question. So what, you went to Nashville before you came to Vegas. What did you think of Nashville and what did you think of McCartney?
McCartney was pretty awesome. I mean, 82 years of age, played for 3 hours, no break.
No break.
No break.
That's
So
impressive.
that was impressive. Nashville was cool. It was, I think 4 nights is too much though.
4 nights of honky tonk. You were good.
I was over it.
You're over the music.
Yeah.
Some pretty ladies down there.
Yeah, a lot of pretty ladies, yeah.
That's the rumor. All right, last question before I get into your background. And we'll talk about this in the episode. You worked in the oil industry for nearly 3 decades.
Yeah, 28 years.
If you were to look back at all the jobs that you had, what do you think was the most important job you had? Not the most significant by title, but what was the most important job that you had in the oil industry?
Oh, that's a cracker. Probably pretty much the first one, which was reconciling the stock every day. I always remember the description was it's your job to check for every litre of oil spilt, delivered, or left at the bottom of the tank. And that was a big responsibility.
Were you well liked in that job?
Not by the drivers, no.
I would imagine.
The accountants love me.
Accountants will love you, the guys in the field, not so much. Because when a mistake is made, you're the guy that shows up and asks, how did that happen?
Yeah.
What was the root cause? How do we avoid it? How do we reconcile it? Fair enough. All right.
That's it.
So now jumping into your background. First of all, you were born 1965.
17th of September.
Congratulations. In Belfast, Northern Ireland.
Belfast.
Interesting time to be born
Yeah.
and to live through, particularly in that neck of the woods.
Yeah, absolutely. I was born into a peaceful environment, and that soon descended. So yeah, it was growing up during those times was difficult.
So growing up, being born in 1965, you're entering the 80s as a young man. Typically, when young people join university, you took a different route.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I took a summer job before going to university. My father asked me to help a buddy of his out in this company that was owned by a family, and would I go in for the summer and help them kind of transition from paper to dumb terminals as they were then, not laptops or computers. And I stayed there 28 years.
Awesome. All right. So that company was the Petroleum Distribution Company, correct?
Correct.
And then that jumped your career into the oil industry. And that company's name was Fuel Services. It was based in Belfast, Northern Ireland. And you were with them for 16 years until they were purchased by a PLC or a publicly traded company.
Yeah.
And then you stayed with that PLC for how many years after the sale?
Another 12.
Nearly 3 decades.
Yeah.
Essentially working for the same company, even though ownership
Yeah,
changed.
essentially that was the case, yeah.
All right.
But we transitioned from being a family-owned business, formed in 1959, a few years after you guys, to becoming a PLC. So it was a very different dynamic.
Very different. You went from a dynamic of essentially what we have right now, which is family-owned, family-operated, very different value structure as a publicly traded company where majority of the focus is on the bottom line.
Correct.
Not necessarily the people or the legacy or how you support the community and your local economy.
You've absolutely nailed it.
Got it. All right. So after that chapter ends, roughly in 2013, you joined Rory McIlroy's board and you created the Rory Foundation. The Rory Foundation. You were the CEO of the Rory Foundation. You ran their charitable contributions and you actually helped rebirth the Irish Open.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we did. Yeah.
And we'll dive into that in great detail because that's actually where our stories meet.
Yeah, that's where we
Is
converge.
shortly after the Riders Cup in Glen Eagles, and in our 4-year journey together with the Rory Foundation and making the Irish Open essentially what it is today,
Absolutely.
which is an amazing, amazing experience.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're an American and you like going over to Ireland, I would highly suggest checking out the Irish
Yeah.
Open.
Well, we turned that tournament around. When we started the Irish Open, it was a total prize fund €650,000, and when we finished with it, it was a $6 million
Part of
event.
the Rolex series.
Yeah, part of the Rolex
It
series.
went
Yeah.
from being a golf tournament that was nearly going to be dropped by the European Tour because it was so unpopular to being by largely one of the most successful ones on
Yeah.
the European Tour.
One of only 3 profitable events they run.
Amazing. Yeah, and we played a small part in
Yeah,
that,
we had a lot to do with it.
particularly you. All right, so after working with Rory, you continued in the world of philanthropy and you worked with various charitable causes, including being the chair of the Mary Peters Trust and being involved in other social causes such as Extern.
Yeah, that's right. Social Justice Charity Extern. Mary Peters Trust. Mary Peters was an Olympian. She won a gold medal in 1972 and set up a charitable foundation, and I was chairing it.
1972, wasn't there something significant that happened around the Olympics in that time?
Yeah, it was in Munich, and in fact, she beat a German. She was a heptathlete, and she beat a German. But of course, the terrible incidents of '72 obscured her successes.
It definitely overshadowed that,
Yeah.
but I think it, from Northern Ireland's perspective, really important and an amazing achievement that you got to be involved in down the road.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's the end of our intro. We'll crack it off with growing up in Belfast and the oil industry. All right, Barry. As we dive into Belfast and the oil industry, I first want to say you're a very close personal friend of mine. We've maintained our friendship even after we worked together. We continue to travel back and forth across the pond. I always look for a reason to come out and visit you because not only do I love you, I love your country, I love the culture. I love introducing people to the country and the culture just because it's such a good time. Holds a special place in my heart. My family on my father's side came over from Ireland. My grandmother's name, LaRue Sullivan, like you trace her lineage back there. So I've always been interested in going out there. And it's one of those places that I will continue to go back to, even though I'm big on traveling to new places. But Italy and Ireland are 2 places in particular that my wife and I continue to go back to.
Well, that's nice to hear.
And thank you for hosting us when we come.
Well, you're always welcome.
I love it.
Well,
Love it.
As do I. And we've had a hard rap, so it's great to get some advocates this side of the pond.
I would advocate if you have not been to Ireland or Northern Ireland, you should definitely go out there. Maybe check out an Irish Open.
Yeah, that would be a great idea.
Yeah, or the British Open. All right. So just to start, what was it like growing up in Belfast? I mean, you were born in 1965. You grew up in a troubling time. Can you kind of explain that for people
Yeah.
that lack perspective?
Yeah, so yeah, Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. Ireland was part of the empire at one time, and then became independent. But the little peculiarity at the top of the island, which is Northern Ireland, remained part of the United Kingdom, and the Irish pretty much wanted the entirety of the island, and there was a group who set about trying to achieve that through force. And I grew up pretty much, my young days were all punctuated by the Troubles, as it was called, and it was difficult. It shouldn't be sugarcoated. We lived in a little town just outside of Belfast. My parents moved out of Belfast because they wanted, obviously, the best for their children. I have a brother, just the 2 of us. Had we stayed in Belfast, goodness knows what might have happened. We might have ended up dead, or we might have ended up joining some paramilitary organisation. It was common. It happened. You had to be careful where you went. You didn't. You had a very small circle of friends because you wouldn't know if the people that you associated with were on the side of remaining part of the United Kingdom or wanted to become part of Ireland, and lots of people were brutally murdered. It was a rough time.
And when you talk about that the division, let's say, between the Republic of Ireland and those in Northern Ireland that are more loyal to the crown, is it also mixed with a religious kind of
Well, there's that
split?
connotation, right?
Catholics, Protestants.
Protestants. The Catholics want to be part of Ireland. The Protestants want to remain part of the United Kingdom. But I think it's a little more nuanced than that. There's plenty of Catholics don't want to be part of the United Ireland. There's plenty of Protestants that don't want to be part of the United Kingdom. But yeah, that's the narrative that developed.
And the narrative, at least that you hear on this side of the pond, is that the Catholics were more, I would say, they wanted to be, they're nationalists. They wanted the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland to rejoin. Catholics might have been more on the lower socioeconomic side, where the Protestants were in positions of power, whether it be the police force or the government. So the narrative, at least, that you hear is that, Catholics are being mistreated to a point where ultimately they're rising up, and that leads to violence.
Yeah, I think there's a grain of truth in that, but I don't think violence is the way to pursue anyone's goals. So,
yeah, it's tough to negotiate when you have a gun to your head.
Yeah,
and I think people largely will push back when that happens.
But I think the experience kind of forged a determination and a stubbornness in us. So, we're a pretty robust group of people. So, and I think that was forged by those experiences.
Yeah. I think people can only be pushed so far.
Yeah, I think
and at
so.
A certain point, you dig your heels in.
Yeah.
And you do it based on your moral foundation and your values, and really nothing more.
Yeah.
You're saying to do something that fundamentally is opposed to my value system, and I'm not on board with that, regardless of how hard you come.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. When did you start? At what time of the Troubles did you first get into the oil industry? Because it's got to be mid '80s, right? When you are joining the workforce.
Yeah. So the Troubles essentially kicked off in '72. So we were in the depths of it in the mid '80s. Everyone had got into their groove. There was a lot of violence. There was a lot of danger. We were in an industry that was we had a target on our back. You wouldn't have typically talked about what you did if you were not careful of the company you were in. And there were plenty of times we had situations where we were under direct threat.
I believe that very much so, because whenever there's violence, right, you're talking about arms.
Yeah.
It's hard to commit, I would say effective violence with just your hands and your feet, right? So you go to weapons, then you go to more advanced weapon systems, and that requires money. For money to buy guns and arms to fund the political movement, you have to have revenue streams. And in America, you saw that largely with the Italian mafia taking over unions, pensions, ports. They really, I would say, infiltrated large, vast amounts of the American economy. Was that happening with the Troubles, where you had these paramilitary groups that had revenue streams and they were trying to get their hooks into businesses to continue to basically fund the campaign of whatever their side was?
Yeah, there was a lot of that. And typically in the oil industry, we have two different revenue streams, taxation systems. There's a lot of oil smuggling went on. So you had a lot of oil companies down near the border who would have been fronts for paramilitary organizations for sure.
When you say the border of Northern Ireland and Ireland, can you describe what that border was like during that time? Because I've been to Belfast post-peace.
Yeah.
And there's no rotating gates. There's no large gates obstructing, let's say, Belfast City Hall. But when you were growing up and, this oil smuggling was going on, what was it like at the divide line?
Well, at the border, it would have, there would have been army presence. There would have been watchtowers.
British Army.
There would have been watchtowers. There would have been large sheds you would have been directed into. You would have routinely had to get out of your car. You'd have been searched all the time. But it's a very porous border because it snakes through the countryside, and there's plenty of places where there would really be no check at all, and there were areas close to the border which would have been regarded as like bandit territory. So, you wouldn't have had any security presence there at all. You know, they would have had to go in by helicopter. It wouldn't have been safe to travel by the road by road. So, you know, so these industries, these guys are inventive. So they built up some clever ways to smuggle product. I mean, I know of one particular business, and he had storage tanks either side of the border. Right? I mean, he was able to like turn a valve and have the fuel going whichever way was most advantageous at the time. So, you know,
I'm assuming he's not collecting, accruing, and paying taxes above board.
none of that going on. Absolutely not.
Now, because it was so political, was there ever an environment where criminal behavior like that was going on, where basically you're selling black market refined fuel or crude or whatever it was, and the government turns a blind eye to it because they don't want to make the situation worse?
Yeah, that is absolutely the case. And when we entered a period of peace, there was a degree of criminality which was tolerated, and could be argued is still today.
Really?
Yeah, and that made the legitimate, honest, hard-working company like ours, it became difficult to trade. You know, like my boss when I first started, you know, and I was, you know, this naive kid, and you know, the guy that owned the business said one day, you know, we pay our taxes on time, we pay the duty that's owed, and we don't think it's unreasonable for everybody else to do that. That's all I ask of our customers. You know, but you know, we didn't play on an even playing field, so it was tough.
That's called a pearl of wisdom that you just passed down.
Yeah.
You said that to me in Ireland, and I've actually used
Yeah.
that. I've used that with vendors, customers. I say, hey guys, we pay our employees, we pay our vendors, and we pay the government taxes when it's due, on time.
Yeah.
It's not out of this world to expect that of your customer base or the partners that you do business with.
For sure.
Standard is
Yeah.
held. And what you're talking about, I mean, what that does to a company when you're allowing black market deals to go on, and for basically other companies or illicit companies to operate off a different set of rules, it disincentivizes the legitimate businesses. It's no different than if you have a group of people working in a department, everybody's doing a really good job except one person comes in late and they leave early and they take 5 smoke breaks and they're playing on their phone and they're not putting out their work effort. At a certain point, if you allow that to continue to happen, the good people on the team will either shirk or steal, or you'll lose talent. They'll exit the company and they'll go find a more advantageous culture to join.
For sure.
So if you're letting that happen, I would say like on an industrial scale, because you're too afraid to impose laws and rules on the individuals, you know, that are involved in criminality, the businesses that really suffer are the legitimate businesses.
Yeah.
Because at a certain point, you throw up your hands and you go, what are we doing here?
Yeah. I mean, small examples, you know, we would have had, our business was primarily the domestic heating market. We were in industrial oils as well, but the bulk of our business would have been
Home heating oil?
Home heating oil. 70% of homes in Northern Ireland would have been heated with home heating oil. And, you know, you would have had occasions when people would have ordered from you, paid you cash for the delivery, and then robbed the tanker, you know, an hour later, because they knew there was a bunch of cash in the tanker.
Did that happen while you were in the job?
Yeah, that happened. That happened frequently.
Did you ever have to deal with any deaths or fatalities while you're on the job?
Thankfully not, no. But we had, I mean, we had threats. I had a boss one time who was under direct threat, you know, and I would have driven him home because it was deemed safer that he didn't drive himself. He would have taken different routes home. He sat beside me with his firearm in his lap, and guns are not readily available to us back home like they are here. So this was a big deal. He was given a personal protection weapon because he was under a direct threat, and you know, and you did it, and it was normal to you. You know, you just, this is what we did.
Normal for the times.
Normal for the time, yeah.
Yeah, everything's relative.
Yeah.
So you shared a story with me when we were in Ireland about your mom. And I think the way you led into the story is that, unfortunately, I think many Americans glamorize the troubles, right? You see movies, you hear stories, maybe you see Daniel Day-Lewis play the boxer in this romantic love story about his trip home from being in prison for 14 years. And it's kind of this romantic notion. where, you took a very, I think, realistic approach. So there's nothing romantic about it. It was a very awful time to be growing up in that. And then you shared a story about how your mom had to get to work.
Yeah, well, sometimes, yeah, yeah. My mom worked for the army, the British Army, and there was it had been a huge hotel in the centre of Belfast that then became an army barracks, and there were times when my mum would have had to go to work in the trunk of a car because it would have been dangerous to have been seen.
Yeah.
So that's, but I mean, it sounds absurd when you talk about it now. But she would have laughed about it when we were having dinner that night and saying, it's crazy. Imagine like having to get to, but these things happened, but everyone lived their lives and got on with it.
True. But I mean, it is absurd in the sense that, like, if you don't understand why you'd go to those lengths to just get to work safely, I think you have to understand some of the events that took place. From your memory, could you explain a few notable events that took place during the Troubles on why people might have to go to work in the trunk of their car?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to create the impression that there was wrong just on one side. There was wrong on both sides, but we're talking about Remembrance Day today. We have a Remembrance Day service on the closest Sunday to the 11th of November every year, and one year the IRA blew up the cenotaph in a town in Enniskillen, a town in Northern Ireland, and killed people that were out paying their respects to the fallen. I mean,
largely civilians were
all
getting
civilians.
killed. Yeah,
all civilians.
Not other paramilitary groups that go out and battle each other and may the best soldier win. It's a bomb that goes off and largely civilians get killed.
So that rocked us. Routinely they were blowing Belfast to bits. You would have routinely been evacuated from your office because it was a bomb scare or indeed a bomb. At times, they would have kidnapped. I remember one instance where they kidnapped a guy who was a cleaner in a police station, chained him to his car, made him drive that car to the police station, and blew him up, and everyone around him. So it wasn't a romantic little struggle. It was brutal.
Yeah. Hence why people go to work in the trunk or the boot of their car, because you don't want to get chained to your car and sent somewhere and have it blown up.
No, but equally, you're not going to give in to it.
No, you still got to go about your day.
Yeah.
And, if you're, while we're on this earth, while God grants us the time that we have here and you show up to work, you should do it to the best of your abilities.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that you should bend to fear or evil. You should charge forward.
Yeah,
I think the Irish, there's no better example than the Irish people in that. All right, so back to the oil industry. Now that we have an understanding of the stage of theater that we're in and the time and history in Belfast, so you start off reconciling spills, very popular with the accountants, maybe not so much popular with the guys in the field. How do you continue to ascend to essentially being the boss man of the company many years later?
Just lucky breaks. So when I started in the oil business, I sat in an office with two people who chain smoked, and I sat on a stool, and there was a shelf that came off the stool, and I had a huge ledger that I worked from, and by the end of the day, I was pretty much crawling out on my hands and knees because the smoke would just descend as the day went on. And I worked at that. I worked at that job. It was going to be a summer job. I ended up working there in that particular role for 18 months, and then. At the time, we were the authorised distributor of Shell products in Northern Ireland.
Nice.
Excluding lubricants. And then we did a deal with Shell, and we were going to become the lubricant distributor for Shell lubricants in Northern Ireland. And they needed someone to set up that part of the business. So they said to me, would you do that? So I went back and forward to Manchester a lot at that time, learning that business. And at that time, that period in my life, it coincided with my father having a stroke, and it was tough at home. And I think when we finally set up that business, they kind of, as a reward to me, then they gave me a job as a domestic sales representative for the company, and the area that I was given to look after was the most lucrative area that the company had. So it was the plum job, right? If you wanted to be in sales, this was the job everybody wanted, and I got it. And that was terrific. So I did that for, God, I don't know, long number of years. And then,
Before you jump on, so you said you were going to Manchester when you were propping up the lubricant side of the
yeah.
business. Is that where the bottling plant was? Was in Manchester?
No, it was where the accounting centre was. So it was just to understand the processes and the procedures that, to kind of shadow the guys that were doing it.
Gotcha.
But they were kind of administering it from Manchester rather than have the English Shell guys didn't want to come to Northern Ireland. So they wanted to be doing it remotely. So then Shell as an organisation thought, well, we can't continue like this. We're going to have to find someone on the ground that would do it. So that's how that happened.
Okay, so you prop that side of the business up, then you jump into sales, and the plum job, as you say, was that selling home heating oil
Selling home heating oil
to end users?
Yeah.
Were you
And
doing anything on the sales side with lubricants at the time, or were you just doing home heating oil?
I was just purely domestic. So what
Gotcha.
we did was we sold into homes and then we sold. So we would sell various services that we provided. We had an automatic top-up service where we could deliver oil without you ever having to order it. It was quite a sophisticated system.
We call that a keep full.
What do you call it?
A keep full.
A keep full.
Essentially, you're keeping the tank full,
Yeah,
typically
yeah.
because you're monitoring the inventory perpetually. So you know what the burn rate is, and you
Yeah.
know when the delivery guy has to go back there,
Yeah.
top off the tank.
Yeah.
So you're setting them up with equipment, you're setting them up with perpetuatory inventory tracking, and making sure that you're keeping that tank full as they're using it to heat and temperature control their homes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was essentially it, yeah. So you were able to upsell. The commission was great. So it was a really good time. You were earning good money. It was fun time. I was out meeting people, which I love. So, and I was also working the prime location. It was the best. The sector I had was the sector everyone wanted to work in.
Now, are you dealing with homeowners directly, or are you dealing with like large contractors that are building out subdivisions? Is it like a one-off, hey, I'm coming to you, the homeowner of this property, and we want to be your home heating oil supplier? Or are you dealing with like large subdivisions where it's hundreds or thousands of homes at a time?
It was a combination of both. You would have gone to the homeowner. So basically you would have, you'd have been tracking house sales. You would have then been on the door basically when people were moving in, saying, have you thought about your fuel supplier? But you also did deals with estate agents, with construction companies that were building properties. So it was pretty much all that, just wherever you could find an inn to sell the oil.
So commercial and residential.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So it sounds like you performed well in that role, and it seems like that was the role that everybody wanted to be at. So it had to have set you up for some other move in the corporate ladder. What was next after you performed in that role?
So then I guess what happened then was and it's lovely to have this conversation because it makes me think back to those happy days. That was an inefficient way to sell oil. And I think we realized that was an inefficient way to sell oil. So the idea then was we were going to revert to an internal sales force. So they looked around for somebody that might be able to set that up and then manage that process. And that was the role that I then was offered, which was kind of poacher turned gamekeeper a bit, because ultimately when that got up to speed, all the guys that did what I had done were surplus to requirements, because we had a much more efficient way of doing it. These guys were out on the road, they were given cars, they were, so that part of the business started to shrink, and our telesales division started to grow, and then I was managing that basically.
Yeah, that's a very common trend here, at least in America, with major oil companies. If you're a distributor for a Shell or a Phillips or Chevron per se, they've changed the model to where, depending on how much volume you produce for the major, you either have an external rep, somebody that'll come out in the field with you, maybe go to a mine site or a large industrial property that gobbles up a lot of lubricant juice, and they'll work with you in the field. They can test samples, they can do a lot in the field. If you don't produce and you don't hit your volume metrics, you're kind of relegated to somebody that's on a phone in Houston who helps you with inside sales. So I think it puts the onus on the distributor that you want to be above the pack because you want that external help. But if you don't perform, then you got somebody on the phone in Houston that's just trying to help you telematically.
I think.
So you guys might have started a trend.
Yeah, well, I don't want to be held responsible for that, but
It's all good.
Yeah. So then we sort of evolved. We moved out of being a distributor for Shell products and we became a distributor for BP. So that was a big deal. That was a huge transition. And again, the transition, I suppose, caused uncertainty with folk, and we were restructuring the business model to be more aligned to BP, and so then I was sort of asked to manage that process. So I became the linchpin between our company and BP while we established the protocols around that. And then I moved into the commercial end, solely into the commercial end of the business after that, which was a good time because BP had a strong commercial presence in Northern Ireland, and we were able to take advantage of that. So that was another little step on the ladder towards actually eventually being the boss.
What was the biggest difference between being a distributor for Royal Dutch Shell and then changing over to British Petroleum, in your opinion or your perspective?
Well, I think we were probably with Shell at exactly the right time. They were good times. There wasn't a lot of oversight really with Shell. BP were there was much more rigor with BP around what you could and could not do. So I think that would probably be
just more rules and guidelines to follow.
Yeah, I remember one time we had a representative from BP came over and he was talking about some safety certificate that we needed to obtain. I remember my boss saying to him rather dismissively, "Oh, it won't catch on over here," and the guy from BP nearly collapsed in his seat. It was this is not a negotiable. This has to be adhered to. Yeah. But that was, it sounds ridiculous now, but back then, it was crazy times.
Yeah, I would say that personal protective equipment and safety compliance in the regulatory environment many decades ago was very different reality than what we face today.
Oh, for sure.
I see old photos of, Jack and the old guard here. You got guys running around with like cut off jean shorts while they're making deliveries back in the day. There was no personal protective equipment, and the way you handled refined products or disposed of those refined products is very different than what you're allowed to do today.
Yeah, for sure. It's much better now.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. One thing that bothers me though is when people view history through the lens of today. And you'll see this a lot like with the slavery topic, right? Where you go, how can you listen to Thomas Jefferson? The man was a slave owner. It's like, you got to get off your high horse. You cannot take today's vantage point and look at something hundreds of years ago and, deem that these people are evil or horrible because of, what the status quo was. I remind people that we weren't the first country to get involved in slavery. And there are 5 European countries that abolished slavery after the United States. Do I think it was good? Absolutely not. I think it's horrible, right? But it was a part of life back then, largely globally, part of life. It was a reality. So if you talk about the old days of Rockefeller dumping gasoline byproduct into rivers to where rivers are catching on fire, it's horrible. But that was the norm back then. Yeah. And as the industry evolved, the practices of safety, the practices of regulatory compliance, that's evolved too, because people want clean air and they want clean water, but you also want affordable energy. And that's a dichotomy that's difficult to realize. And I think we've only gotten better. But there is a breaking point where you go too far with it, and the price is $8-9 a gallon. That is not affordable. So it needs to ebb and flow.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do think though, it gets back to the point of principle. I think, it would irritate us if someone would ring up and say, oh, your product's much dearer than somebody else's, and the guy was buying it was trundling down the road in a leaky old tanker, that had ball tires and, but still they didn't see that. They saw a cheaper product, so that was good. So, over the years, to kind of educating the consumer to realize that, whilst of course you want value for money, but value for money doesn't need to be measured simply in the pounds, shillings and pence. There's a lot more to it. So, selling, as the years evolved in the industry, I think selling became a lot more sophisticated and nuanced.
I agree with that. And that's something that we preach here is that, anybody can beat you on price. All they got to do is be bigger or more stupid, right? Anybody can win on price. Anybody can sell you oil and drop it off on a dock. I think what you try to sell is you try to sell value.
Yeah.
You try to sell a partnership and a relationship. And there's many ways that you can create value. I might have a more expensive product by 2 pennies than my nearest competitor, but my trucks don't show up with bald tires, because if you do that for long enough, you're probably going to blow a steer tire. And when that steer tire blows, that driver's going to be pulled into oncoming traffic, and maybe he hits a minivan with a family in it. That's not the type of community that I want to live in. I want to live in a community where the oil distributor has their trucks pre and post shift checked, make sure that they're safe to go on the road, make sure the oil or the fuel is quality before it goes into a piece of machinery, because some of these machines are $500,000 engines.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't have engines blowing because you have dirty oil going in it, and you shouldn't have unsafe drivers and trucks on the road. So it's all part of the value proposition of who you're doing business with. Some people only care about price. I would say that's not the customer we're going after.
Yeah.
Let somebody else take the stupid pill.
Completely agree with that. I remember one time having a customer of mine, and he was purchasing heating oil, and I think, say the expenditure was £540, and he could get it £4 cheaper somewhere else. And he said to me, "I cannot believe you're going to lose my customer for £4. And I said, "I cannot believe you're going to leave me for £4. So,
I get it.
it depends what side of the coin you're looking at here,
Yeah. And we've lost customers over price. We
Yeah.
lost one of our biggest customers last year in a certain market over half a penny.
Crazy.
And it was funny because they gave the business essentially to a competitor of theirs. And we tried to explain to them it was half a penny on a freight rate. So it wasn't even the product price that we were in disagreement on. We were locked into a delivery rate that really hadn't adjusted since pre-COVID. We tried to explain to them that, hey, freight rates have gone up 30% post-COVID. It actually went up more than that, and then it kind of tickered down a little bit, and that's where it stabilized. And that was because there were massive layoffs. And then when the economy got back and they're trying to get the supply chain back in order, everybody's fighting over drivers. There's a limited pool, so everybody jacks up their driver rates. Well, at the same time, you have a lot of the legal world and these nuclear verdicts where you're getting $100 million verdict against you. So insurance is rising.
Yeah.
So largely due to your labor costs and the insurance market is what drove up the price of deliveries. And we were negotiating a half a penny more in freight, and they just wouldn't do it. I'm like, okay, well, if you want to go with a company that has worse safety metrics than we do and give the business essentially to a competitor of yours, that's your prerogative to do. But we're holding firm on our freight rate. We have good drivers. We have good assets. Our equipment is in good orderly condition. And we're not going to offer that at a subsidized cost.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense for us. Like, our guys work hard, and they work hard to keep their community safe and to get home to their families at night. And I'm not going to reduce the price of their work. So if we have to part ways over half a penny, so be it. Yeah. We keep that door open. I try never to burn a bridge. In the event that their service isn't as good as what somebody said on a piece of paper, they can always pick up the phone and call us again. But our freight rates are our freight rates.
Absolutely. A profit with principle. That's what you want how you want to operate a business.
Yes, I think you want to operate a successful business. But in my opinion, when we exit this world and go to the pearly gates, I don't think God is going to care about my EBITDA number. I do think He's going to care how we got there.
Yeah.
How did you run the business? If you show me how you run a business, I can show you what type of person you are. And I think that the big emphasis that we put here is culture, safety, and very creative marketing. And I think that's what distinguishes us differently. But the culture part is how you're doing it. Yeah.
And it's essential because your oil is no less slippery than the next guy's oil. So it's all about the people. And it's all about the assets that you're using to deliver that product. Essentially, the product's the product, but it's the people that really matter.
And how you do it. You get the right people on the bus, and then you point the bus in the right direction. You make sure we're all rowing in that direction together, and you'll be unstoppable. Yeah. That doesn't mean we'll be the biggest company, the most profitable company, but I think if you can run a successful business and you can distinguish yourself on how you run that business, not only will you get really talented people to join your team, but the customers that work with you, it's not going to be a vendor relationship where you're, selling peanuts at a baseball stadium. It's like, this is a real relationship. This is a partnership. You're the customer, I'm the supplier in this, but we're both offering value to each other. And that's the type of customer that's not going to leave you over half a penny because they get it.
Yeah, of course they do.
Yeah, that it could be a lifelong customer. As long as they're treated fairly and responsibly, I think that, it's your customer to lose, really.
Yeah.
All right, so back to you. So you start off reconciling inventory. You end up setting up the lubricant side of the business. Then you go into probably the most lucrative and attractive job in sales and home heating oil. Not only working with end users residentially, but commercially. You go through this massive transition from Shell to BP and the new rule sets and guidelines and ever evolving safety that's happening. What's next for you in your oil career? Because you've made quite the ascent so far.
So then we kind of our arrangement with BP came to a natural end. So then the company decided we were going to just be an independent. We weren't going to be tied to the owners decided we were going to go out on our own and not be tied to a major oil company. So there was a restructuring of the company then, and I then was made a director of that company. At that time, I was essentially the sales director, responsible for all aspects of sales, and was responsible for the rebranding of the business because we had to drop the BP colours and so forth. So that then was another evolutionary phase. My career in oil I always seemed to be put in the place where we were starting something new. So they sort of must have thought I'd done a reasonable job with the lubricants part of the business and so forth. So I then ended up becoming the sales director of an independent company, which was great because we felt we were pioneering. We were setting out a new course. So that was probably the most exciting time. I think that's where the career in oil plateaus.
About what year is this taking place when you're going from BP to independent?
This is in the mid. We're talking now early to mid 90s.
Early to mid 90s, and from your perspective, that was the peak. That was the best that it was.
I think so. I think we had some great years then because then we moved toward, at the turn of the century, the company was sold, and certainly it wasn't. Whilst my careers continued on an upward trajectory, it certainly wasn't the same after that.
So when it sold, it went from a family-owned enterprise. Who was the family?
The Webb family.
The Webb family. And what is your impression of the Webb family?
Oh, they're incredible people. It's amazing. Ian Webb was his father, Captain Webb, started the company. He was a captain in the British Army. He would have come into the office in his +4s, a real character. Came in one day with a very badly bruised eye, and I remember saying to him, "My goodness, Captain Webb, what on earth happened to you?" And his description was, "I've a heavy brogue, Barry, a heavy brogue." And he got his shoe caught between the accelerator pedal and the brake in the car and hit a lamppost. And it was a heavy brogue caused the bruised eye. Ian Webb, then his son, he had two sons, Ian and Robert, and Ian was kind of the man who drove the business forward. Taught me values in business that have stood with me all my life. And indeed, when I moved into the philanthropic world and started Rory's Charity, our office was in a building he owned. And I would be invited to the chairman's Christmas lunch. And one year I made a speech saying that, I pretty much owed my entire life to this guy from a professional perspective. Amazing, and a friend to this day.
So what were some of the values that he instilled in you that you carry on to this day?
Just integrity and decency. Be honest.
Yeah. Do the right thing whether someone's looking or not.
Yeah.
Or do what you say you're going to do. That's a big one.
Yeah.
People oftentimes will set expectations or timelines, even though no one has a gun to their head. I'm going to do X, Y, Z at this time and day. And then they don't follow through on that.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing ever.
Absolutely.
We talked about this last night. You can lose a little bit of money, even a lot of bit of money, but you can't lose a little bit of integrity. Yeah. And when you start saying things and not following through on that really dings your integrity and with that, your reputation.
And he cared about his staff. Like every employee would have jumped through rings of fire for that family. He really cared about you. I mean, I remember one day, when I was much younger and a little silly, someone owed us money, And I went down to this guy's shop to get the money, and the guy came out and said, "You're either very brave or very stupid. Like, get out of my shop." And I was, "But you owe the money." And he was, "Get out of the shop." And I went back to the office, and the boss got to hear about this, and he said, "Please don't ever do that again." Like, this guy was connected. This was a bad guy. And he said, like, your life is not worth the bad debt. Don't. And I was like, but I just thought he was a shop owner. And he was like, "No, this guy's sketchy.
Has a reputation.
Yeah. But he didn't need to come looking me out to talk to me. But he did.
I think that is something unique about, I mean, particularly family businesses, but definitely family oil businesses, is that you are intimately involved with your people. And I don't like staff or employees. Like, it's a team. Business is a team sport. You win or lose as a team, really. It's not one person that does it all. And you really care about your team members, and you know what's going on. Like, you can have a disagreement or a very contentious meeting, and then that night call them because you know that, hey, their kid's going into surgery. And you actually legitimately care.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I imagine that changed when you guys sold to a public company. So as we're moving into the end of the first part of our interview, what was life like in that 12 years when you're working for a publicly traded company, no longer a family business run company?
So the Webbs sell the business, which sends shockwaves through the employees, right? We were lifers. We were, as far as we were concerned, we were going to be with this family. The two sons had started to work in the business.
All signs pointed towards this
everything.
is my career.
Yeah.
I'm going to retire here.
So we arrived into a completely new environment. The staff, you referenced attitudes of staff earlier. Like, we thought, right, okay, they bought us. They must be pretty good at what they do. The staff were terrible. I mean, they just didn't care. They just were coming to work during the day and leaving at night. They didn't, it was of no interest to them. And as the years went on, it became very apparent it was just about shareholder value. It was nothing about delivering a good service to a customer. And, the PLC that bought us were a very aggressive player in the oil industry. They grew by acquisition. So they were buying lots of oil companies, family-owned businesses, and it was a huge growth spurt for the first 5 or 6 years, and it worked well for me because I ended up actually on the board of the energy division of the PLC that had bought us, because they must have recognised something in me and asked me to sit on the board. But they were brutal people.
Yeah, and I think with the oil industry, it's a mature industry, right? It's not like AI where there's this giant boom and like hockey stick growth. Your growth largely comes, it's either organic because you're offering products and services better than the next guy, and there's some growth that can happen with that, but largely the growth is due to mergers and acquisitions. So it sounds like that was their strategy. Not only were they going to buy your company, but they were going to go on a series of acquisitions to, continue to grow market share. And the focus is all on return on investment, bottom line, shareholder value, and along the way, you lose the values that the employees of the family business have become accustomed to. And I think with that, apathy sets in, performance starts to go down, and before you know it, it's a completely different company.
Yeah, for sure.
At what point did it start to not sit so well with you?
I would say probably 8 years in. So probably, 8 years in, I started to feel this is just not the direction of travel I want to be going in. I would say then, although I hung around another 4 years. So, but we were buying and growing at such a rate, and we just seemed to be losing any semblance of decency.
Who you used to be.
Yeah, and we were buying companies in Scotland and England. They're still a very aggressive player in the market. I think they're in the United States now as well, but they certainly weren't there when I was there. But the fun went out of it. It just, you were reporting to a boss based in Dublin who, you didn't see that often. When he did want to see you, he wasn't going to praise you.
Yeah.
And it just became a it just became drudgery.
How, before we conclude that chapter, how large did it get while you were there before you left? Like, how big had the company got by employee count or by, volume? Like, roughly how big was this operation after this series of acquisitions?
It would have been a 600 people organization. The volume, God, we're talking about billions of liters.
Yeah. So a pretty big company.
Yeah.
And when you started with the family business, how many employees did they have at that time?
14.
14 employees to six. Basically, you're on a trajectory where you're going to be 1,000 plus employee company doing crazy volume, not just in Northern Ireland, but all over the UK, and with ambitions of going across the pond.
And one of the good things, you've just flickered a recollection in my mind, was that did get us into the retail business. We were never in the retail business as a family-owned business, but we then got into the retail oil business.
Owner-operator retail, or were you just supplying fuel to different operators and dealers?
Yeah. We bought the ConocoPhillips business in Northern Ireland, which got us a leg into the retail market, and then we expanded our retail offering. With
just different brands or different independents where you were supplying branded fuel and unbranded fuel?
No, all branded.
All ConocoPhillips brand?
But we rebranded it from ConocoPhillips to our company.
Oh, okay.
So...
Gotcha.
So that was quite a fun time. I didn't know very much about the retail market, so that was fun. I enjoyed that.
Retail's great. I mean, I don't personally like operating retail. We have no ambitions of doing that. But if you can supply a retail store, some of the easiest loads you're going to deliver.
Yeah, we enjoyed it, and we developed true partnerships around. We talk about the value, and one of the things we did was we would have made sure that we had. The lighting for the canopies in the retail site were all proper, environmentally friendly. You could have installed a bright oil light if you wanted, but we weren't doing that sort of stuff. And we really lifted the retail offering in Northern Ireland. I think our sites were smart. I still get pride when I drive past them.
That was gonna be my next question. If you drive by them today, are you still happy with how they're run?
Yeah.
You can tell.
And they look good. They still look good. So all that investment at the front end really was worth it.
Well, that's good to hear. At least they honored that, because we've had some of our own similar experience with divesting retail assets and driving by assets that you used to own, and if they're not well kept or up to the standard that you used to hold, it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
To see that degradation take place.
Yeah, no, they're all still looking. They're all still looking pretty good.
Awesome. All right, so as you're ending your chapter, nearly 30 years in the oil industry, you had gone from small family-run business to this giant PLC. What was it that was the tipping point when you said, you know what, I think I'm going to start something new?
The tipping point was we had an Irish company, a Southern Irish company, and the Northern Irish company was aligned to the mainland operation, and then the Southern Irish company was doing its own thing, different. They trade in euros, we trade in pounds, different tax rates, different compliance. It was a pretty separate business, and then there was a decision taken that we were going to run the business as an all Ireland business, not keeping us with the Scottish part of the business. And I was asked to then run this new business, this new all Ireland business, and I just felt the resistance I would have met from our brothers in Southern Ireland just would not have been worth it for me. I had rebranded this business, and our Southern business was part of the rebrand. They fought me tooth and nail. They didn't care for my views on things. So I just thought, no, I don't want to do this. So I said, look, guys, I think I'd rather exit the business than I don't have the fight for it. I don't have the passion for it. So it'd be wrong of me to take it on.
Understandably. Yeah, so, you're being asked to just go down the gauntlet one more time, and you're like, I've done that, guys.
Yeah.
And I've performed at a high level, and I see the direction the company's going, and I'm saying I want to step off the ship.
Yeah.
The train will keep going without you.
Yeah.
Pretty soon you'll be a ghost of Christmas past, and no one will talk about you anymore, and you're just saying, I'm done with this train.
That's why it's good to do this.
You get to reflect on it.
Because interestingly, the day I left, just when you say that, the day I left, some of my staff were coming in to say goodbye to me, and some of them were kind of emotional, which was nice. And they were, but we will see you again. And I was like, not a chance. When I walk out this door, like, you think I'm coming back to say hello at Christmas time or whatever? Unless you bump into me.
I'll see you at the pub.
Yeah.
You can have a Guinness. But as far as this building and this life,
not a chance.
Moving on to new chapters.
Yeah.
And that is where we'll pick up in our next episode. So, Barry, I want to say thank you for walking us through a little bit of the history of Belfast. I'm incredibly interested in your oil story. I love it because it's kind of the genesis of where you started. And you've done some really cool things after that, including your work with the Rory Foundation. So we'll pick up in that in part 2 of our interview.
Look forward to it.
I appreciate you coming in.